guys, it's Grace from Graceful Books, and I am back with another video. So today's video is going to be what I recently read, and normally I want to have these videos be a bit shorter, but I stalled a little bit on filming this, and I've read 14 books so far since January 1st, or I finished 14 books since January 1st. So as a result, this video is going to be kind of long because I suck at describing books and I get a little rambly. So as a result, I'm going to try to timestamp where I'm talking about certain books so you can skip around if you don't want to hear or watch this whole entire video all the way through, because I understand it can probably be a bit daunting. Anyways, I'm also sorry for the lighting. It's very overcast today. It's also pretty early, but normally by now there's sun. And it's not, and I don't have a ring light, I just have a regular daylight bulb, so the lighting is going to be really bad, so I'm sorry about that as well. So I mentioned in another video that this year my main goal with reading is to finish series that I've started so that I can start anew with series. The only one I'm not going to count is Tokyo Ghoul, just because that's 13 books, and they're pretty quick and easy to get through, so I'm not too worried about finishing that one before the end of the year. But every other series that I started, I want to finish, or at least attempt to finish, or get caught up on. So I use my gift cards and other gifts from this Christmas and my birthday to buy those final books in the series. So hopefully I can actually keep up with that. So far I haven't done an awful job because the first book I read in 2021 is Immortal Reign by Morgan Roach, which is the 6th and final book within the Fallen Kingdom series. If you know nothing about this series, it is a high fantasy YA series that is oftentimes compared to Game of Thrones, which I've heard people who have read and watched Game of Thrones say that it's nothing like it, so don't go into the series with that expectation. It is a very emotional, heavy, kind of dark series, but it's not that dark. It's not as dark as Game of Thrones goes. Anyways, if you know nothing about the series, the main plot point is that there are 3 different kingdoms on this one island. There's, holy crap, I can never remember the name. There's Limeros, Paelja, and Arianos. I'm saying that completely wrong, but there's those 3 kingdoms. One is ruled by a gold rich, very power-hungry person. The other one is ruled by another power-hungry person who is known as the King of Blood because he's very cruel and violent. And then Paelja is ruled by a very self-serving ruler who lets his people kind of suffer in poverty. And we follow a character from each of these kingdoms. One's a princess, one's a prince, and then one is just a regular commoner, and we kind of follow them as their worlds collide and as a mythical legend starts to come to life. It is a series that I absolutely adored at one point in my life. I still think that I enjoy it because I used to binge read it so excessively that I would read one book a day. I no longer feel that way towards this series. I still enjoyed this book a lot, but I felt like it was slightly rushed, and because it had been so long since I'd been in this world, it took a hot minute for me to dive back into the characters and the world and the entire story. I had to recap or refresh my memory on what was going on with a summary for Crystal Storm. I still really enjoyed this book. I still love the characters a lot, and I'm pretty sure that I would have no problem rereading this series, but I feel like my opinions on it would change just a little bit. But I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars and personally really enjoyed it. Wasn't the most amazing conclusion to a series, but it was still good. So the next one is Obsidio by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. I almost said Amy Kristoff and Jay Kaufman. No, it's Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is the 3rd and final book within the Illuminae Files trilogy. And oh my goodness, if you know nothing about this trilogy, it is a sci-fi YA series. And basically the first book in the series, which is Illuminae, follows 2 characters as their illegal mining colony on another planet gets terrorized and attacked. And we follow this story through emails text messages, voice memos, and files, and all this stuff. It is told in a very unique, interesting format that makes the series and books go by super, super quickly. And with each new addition to the series, you get new characters that you are introduced to. And this one is my favorite one in the series. I was not expecting that because when it started, I felt like it was going a little slowly and I wasn't into it. But the tension built so eloquently throughout this one that there were so many overwhelmingly satisfying moments, and moments that got my heart racing and got me so invested in the characters and in the story that this ended up being my favorite one in the trilogy. And I'm not entirely sure if that's a popular opinion or not, but this one is the best one for me. I'm so happy that I got to pick up this trilogy because it definitely is up my alley. I really enjoyed every single book. And yeah, Gemini is definitely my least favorite and Illuminae is my second favorite, but this one is the best one for me, period. I absolutely adored it and had so much fun reading it. So the next one I read or listened to is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. It is narrated by Jack Hawkins and Louise Brealey. I don't know how to describe this book. I guess it is a mystery thriller adult novel that follows a therapist or psychologist who transfers to a psych ward. I don't think it's called a psych ward. I'm butchering this. He gets transferred to an inpatient facility. Yeah, that's it. He gets transferred to an inpatient facility, and he is highly interested in one of the more high-profile patients at this facility who was a famous artist who ended up killing her husband, and ever since she killed him, she has not spoken a single word at all. And our main character wants to understand what exactly caused her to stop speaking, what exactly happened the day that her husband was brutally murdered, and things along those lines. So we kind of alternate between his perspective in present day and then her perspective through journal entries that happened around the time of her husband's murder. This audiobook was really well done. I binged this in one day. I could not stop listening to it. I had the audiobook playing the whole entire day, and I read it in one day. It was so good and engaging. I don't know if I would have been as invested if I had read the book instead of listened to it. I know there's some controversy around this one because I know some people are like, it wasn't that good or it's controversial, things along those lines. I didn't have any problems with it. I personally really enjoyed the journey and the story that was being told and the way it was told. It was done masterfully, in my opinion. I got so hyped and upset that I didn't see the ending coming because I feel like I should have figured it out, and yet I didn't. So I think this was such a good read, so I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. If a thriller can blow my mind and keep me invested the whole entire time, it's usually like a 5 out of 5 stars. So that's what this one got. It was so good. So the next one is His and Hers by Alice Feeney, which was another audiobook that I borrowed from my library. It was read by Richard Armitage. And Stephanie, I did not put her last name. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, it's read by Richard and Stephanie. This one is a mystery thriller written by Alice Finney. It's an adult as well. And it follows two perspectives, a female and a male. And the female is a journalist who is trying to prove herself worthy to the news network that she works for. And our main guy character is a detective who has some sort of involvement with a murder victim that shows up on their case files, and that he is tasked with the mystery to solve who killed her. And turns out our journalist also has some sort of connection with the victim as well, and it kind of follows them as the one murder turns into a serial. I am so bad at words. It turns into a serial killer killing woman off, and we follow the two main perspectives as they're trying to figure out who exactly is causing this and why all of them seem to have a connection with the two main characters. And I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. It wasn't an awful book. Like, it wasn't an awful read by any means. 3 out of 5 stars doesn't mean it was a bad book. It just wasn't what I wanted it to be. I wasn't as invested in this as I would have liked to be. I thought it was good. I thought the pacing wasn't horrible. But then, like, the ending came, the twist came, and I was kind of like, that doesn't make sense, but okay. You know what I mean? Like, I could have gotten past it if some of the things that happened previously in the story lined up more so with the twist, but they didn't. So the twist in the end did not make any sense, and as a result, I could not get past it and enjoy this book for what it was. I feel like if the twist was done more masterfully and if there was more thought put into it, I would have probably given this like a 4 out of 5 stars or a 3.5 out of 5 stars, because really it wasn't an awful book. It was very, very dark and messed up. I will link my Storygraph review down below so you can look at the content warning, or you can just look at the content warning in general. I really enjoy that Storygraph does that for you. So if you want to do that and check out like the content warning before you think of picking this one up, I would go and do that, because there's a lot that happens in this one that could be incredibly triggering. So yeah, I gave that one a 3 out of 5 stars. It wasn't awful, but the twist kind of ruined it for me. So the next one is Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. This is the second and final book within the Six of Crows duology. It takes place in the Grishaverse. It is a YA fantasy series, and to put it simply, the first book follows 6 misfits or 6 criminals that are tasked with an impossible heist. And this book kind of continues their story. So here's my thing. I'm starting to think that Leigh Bardugo and I just do not mesh well. I love the concept of this duology. I really do. And I liked some of the characters. But I also was kind of iffy on some of the main characters, and as a result, I just wasn't fully invested in this duology, given that it is very character-driven. There is a plot, don't get me wrong, but it's very character-driven. If it just focused on the plot, both of these books could have fit into one book, personally. But it was character-driven, so they're a lot bigger than they probably would have been if it was just plot-driven. And I could back up some of the characters, but other characters I really couldn't get into. Also, it doesn't help that I was spoiled for this book and like too many times. I was spoiled for this book too many times. And it was something that involved like one of my favorite characters in this series of all time. And so I was very hesitant to pick this book up for the longest time. I could have finished the series way sooner than I did, but I wanted to try to erase what I had been spoiled for from my head. But I ended up saying fuck it, let's just get it over with. Let's read it and just get it over with. And I personally did enjoy this. I think I enjoyed this just a little bit more than the first book because more happens in this one. It's not as stagnant. In the first one, you spend a lot of time just kind of learning about the characters. But I feel like you also learn way more about a lot of the characters that I personally cared about in this one, which I enjoyed. But in the first one, it felt very stagnant, like they were just kind of wandering and traveling to the place where they were supposed to pull off the heist, which wasn't awful by any means. It was well written, but also this one had way more going for it, and I enjoyed that. But I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. It was still a really enjoyable read, but also it wasn't good enough to get the 5 stars for me. So the next book I'm going to talk about is the Brothers Grimm, 101 Fairy Tales. So my boyfriend bought this for me last year. It's taken me almost a full year to read this book and finish it. Just because the tales are very short, but they're not the most engaging. Every single tale isn't the most engaging. So as a result, I couldn't get super into it and just binge it like I could other books. But this one basically is a collection of stories that were written by the Grimm brothers, which, if you don't know, they're the ones who wrote the original fairy tales that we know and love by Disney, like Snow White and Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty, things like that. A lot of those tales were originally created by the Brothers Grimm. And if you don't know, fairy tales were originally written for adults. They were not written for children. So they are way, way darker than what we know and love. So I wanted to read the original tales and kind of see what they were all about. And I'm really glad that I got the opportunity to do that. I'm really grateful that my boyfriend got me this, because it was definitely a one-of-a-kind experience for me. I really enjoyed it. But also, it's a huge collection of short stories, and I'm not going to love all of them. I'm not going to hate all of them. I'm not going to enjoy all of them. So obviously, I just landed on a 3 out of 5 stars for this one. I'm still really happy I have it, and I think the cover is really pretty, and I love just holding it. So thank you, boyfriend. So the next one I'm going to talk about is I Know Who You Are by Alice Feeney. This is another adult mystery thriller written by her, and it follows a young actress whose husband has suddenly gone missing, and she also happens to have a stalker that looks a lot like her, who keeps sending her messages saying, I know who you are, and her world seems to be falling apart at her feet, with her being the main suspect in her husband's disappearance. So this one, once again, it was very fast-paced. It was easy to get through. The chapters were very short, and it flew by pretty quickly, which was really nice and enjoyable. It wasn't a hassle to read it or anything like that, and I think a lot of aspects in it were really well done. And then there's just there's like 2 perspectives in this book, and then there's 2 different timelines too. And one of the perspectives, I'm gonna link my story graph review for this one down below. And I'm also gonna link Books and Lala's 3 thriller video where she talks about this book, so you can kind of understand why I wasn't the biggest fan of this book. I just really didn't like the way something was handled in it, and as a result, I could not fully enjoy this book. I also feel like it was just very gross. The story in general, like, And don't get me wrong, I can handle like gross stories. I can enjoy gross stories, but this one I understand what she was going for. I do, but also I feel like she missed it a little bit she missed the mark a little bit with one of her perspectives, and then the plot twist, ooh. Yeah, I don't know. So I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. It wasn't the best for me. So the next one is another audiobook that I borrowed from my library. It is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. I cannot speak. And it's narrated by Katie McLean and John Lindstrom. It is a horror thriller, mystery, adult novel, as Riley Sager tends to write, and it follows a young woman it follows 2 different timelines. Basically, a young woman, when she was a little girl, her and her family bought a mansion and lived in it for like basically a week until they were chased out by spirits, and the father wrote a whole entire nonfiction story about their experiences in that house with ghosts and spirits and demons, essentially. And our main character doesn't believe the story at all. She does not think any of the events that occurred in the book happened in real life. And when her father passes away and she inherits the mansion, she decides to go back and figure out what exactly happened and if anything at all that happened in the story that he wrote is true. So here's my thing. I absolutely love Riley Sager. I've never been disappointed in a book by him until now. This book was just boring. I hate to say it, but I got so bored throughout it. I did not care at all about our main character. She was very flat and just not engaging at all. I feel like she had no personality at all, which just was not appealing. And given that a lot doesn't happen throughout the story, you want your character to be engaging or entertaining, and she really wasn't. So as a result, I did not really enjoy this book or my reading experience that much. The narration wasn't bad by any means, but personally I did not enjoy the story that much. The plot twist and like the ending wasn't bad. I was very, like, Riley Sager is very good at writing plots that you cannot follow, and as a result, like, when the ending hits, you're just like, what? I absolutely love that about him. That's the main reason this book got a 2 out of 5 instead of a 1 out of 5, is simply for that ending. I think it was very well done and interesting, and I'm happy about that. But besides that, this book had nothing going for it. It was really, really lackluster. And so I'm hoping that this is the last time his books disappoint me, because personally I really enjoy reading him. I've loved literally every single book before this, except for this one. So this one's just a massive letdown for me, and I'm not happy about it. Okay, so the next one is A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Bridget Kemmerer. This is the second book within the Cursebreakers trilogy. I believe it's a trilogy. It might be more than that, because we originally thought it was a duology. Or did we think? I don't think we even thought it was a duology. I think we thought it was a standalone, and it ended up not being. So I think it's a trilogy, but don't quote me on that. Anyways, this is a YA fantasy series that follows a young girl named Harper who has cerebral palsy, and she is from our world. She lives in Washington, D.C., and one night while she is standing guard for her brother, who is doing something that's a little sketchy, just making sure that he's got backup and he's all good, she happens to see a man dressed strangely dragging an unconscious girl into the street, and she's like, whoa, I cannot let this happen. She charges into the street with a pipe to attack the guy, and instead of like winning, he ends up taking her instead and transports to a completely different world called Emberfall. I always want to call it Iron Rose, but that's the name of the castle. She gets taken to a place called Emberfall, where the castle and all who are in it, which is a guardsman named Gray and a prince named Ren, are placed under a curse. Basically, every season, they are allowed to bring a girl from another world to the castle for Ren to fall in love and woo, and for her to fall in love with him. And if it does not happen by the end of the cycle, he turns into a wild beast and essentially will kill whoever is in his way. And anyone who dies in that cycle stays dead when the cycle resets. So we follow Harper as she's basically being held captive, and they're informed that this is the final season that this cycle will happen. So at the end of it, when Ren transforms, he will stay that way forever, and the cycle will not reset. So Harper's falling in love with him is very, very important, and this is just a continuation of the story that we followed in the first book. I really loved the first book. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, and I was really excited to get into this one. I personally really enjoyed basically every single character we were introduced to in this one, except for one, and she kind of ruined my reading experience throughout the whole entire book. And as a result, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, when I feel like it possibly could have been a 4.5 or a 5 out of 5. But the new character that we're introduced to, I genuinely was not the biggest fan of her. If you want to know more details, I did a full review of this book, so I will link it down below so you guys can check that out as well, or I will link it up here, whichever one's easiest. But yeah, there you go. And the next one is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deisha Philia. This is an audiobook that I borrowed from my library once again, and it is narrated by Janina Edwards. This is a collection of short stories, so it's literary fiction or contemporary, whichever one you want to refer to it as. And it is a collection of short stories, like I said, that follow Black women, Black girls who are God-fearing, go to church, believe in God, and they also have parts of themselves that kind of contradict that aspect of their lives. And you kind of get to see them be humanized and deal with their own personal struggles with their sins and who they are as a person versus their relationship with God. I am a Christian. I Loved this book. Janina Edwards did a fantastic job narrating it, but also each story was very, very beautifully done. I just loved it. This is my most favorite short story collection ever that I've ever had the opportunity to read. I haven't read too many, but this one was so fantastically done. The writing was beautiful, the stories were impactful, and there was a message to every single one of them, and I liked the correlations between all of them. I enjoyed the representation that was in here too, and as a fellow Christian, I just really loved the overall message of this story, of this short story collection. I could relate to a lot of what was going on in certain aspects of the story, obviously not fully, but I was able to relate to an extent, and I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed my reading experience with this one, and I've never had a short story collection make me cry, but this one did, so I would highly recommend this. Just 100% would recommend this. I think it is amazing. So, as a result, I give this a 5 out of 5 stars. Probably one of my, this is definitely one of my most favorite reads that I've read so far this year. It is just amazing. Like, my eyes are getting watery talking about it. But, yeah, no, I love that book so much. Okay, anyways, moving on. So the next one is They All Fall Down by Rachel Helsel Hall. This is also an audiobook that I borrowed from my library, and it's also read by Janina Edwards because I fell in love with her narration style in the last book I mentioned. And oh boy. So this is sold to us as a retelling of And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, which I personally really love retellings of that book because it's one of my favorite classics. And so with that being said, I was really excited diving into this, and it follows a Black woman named Miriam. She goes by Mimi, but her name is Miriam. We follow a middle-aged Black woman named Miriam as she gets this offer to go to an island off the Mexican coast. I cannot speak. She goes to an island off of Mexico and is essentially told that she'll be on a reality show and there's a cash reward in it for her. But when she arrives, she gets told, along with everyone else who showed up, that is not actually what's going on. Someone that is related to all of them in some way, shape, or fashion has passed away, and one of them to all kind of get to know each other and things like that on this island. But obviously, as the story goes, things start to go wrong, and so on and so forth. I DNF'd this book at 42%. And here's my thing. I personally believe that if you put in the effort to read a story, especially if you get at least 10%, 25% through, you have the right to rate it and comment on the story. So that's what I did. I rated it and I gave it a 1 out of 5 stars. So I understand that Hall wanted us to believe that our main character is an unreliable narrator, and they did too good of a job of it, so I didn't take anything that Miriam thought or said very seriously. I had a very hard time taking any of her worries to heart, and as a result, it kind of takes you out of the suspense of the story, which at the point that I was at, there should have been suspense, but there really wasn't. Literally, I almost got 50% of the way through this book, and nothing of interest has happened. Nothing. We get this far, and we're just now learning, some of the backstories of the characters. And I also read a review where someone said they like to refer to this as character soup. So, essentially, you get dumped, a bunch of characters get dumped on you all at once. And that's hard enough when you're reading a physical book. But when you're listening to an audiobook, it's even harder to process when a million characters are introduced to you all at once. And that's what happened with this book. So I literally could not follow who was who throughout the whole entire thing. And it was very, very distressing. And I was even taking notes, I was taking excessive notes on this book because I was having the hardest time following the storyline and who was who and whose story was whose and things like that. I just had the hardest time. I also found it to be, very just aggravating to read because none of the characters were likable. And my thing is, I can read a book if the characters are not likable, especially I feel like if it moves the plot along in some way, shape, or form. But I literally could not stand reading from Miriam's perspective. And I could not stand, like, any of the characters that we were introduced to, except for maybe Desi. She wasn't too awful. But I just, none of the characters were likable. The plot was so slow and nothing was happening. And I feel like almost 50% of the way through, something should have happened. Maybe the ending would have made it worth it, but from the reviews I've read, there's a lot of people saying that this really wasn't it, and I kind of agree from what I read, so that one was a 1 star and a disappointment. So the next book I read is Monster by Walter Dean Myers. My boyfriend once again recommended this book, and this is a literary fiction contemporary story that follows a young black boy who's 16 named Steve Harmon, and he is essentially in prison and he is going to trial for a suspected homicide that happened during a robbery that Steve was a part of. And we follow this story in like a script format. We also get to read some journal entries from Steve himself. The main reason it's written in a script format is because he has this desire to make films and be a director, essentially. And so he decides to write this whole entire story, his entire story, in script format, except for his journal entries. And this story was so well written. It was so fast paced. I got sucked into it right away and could not put it down the second I picked it up. It moved so quickly. There was a lot of subtext. I think I'm using that word right. I might not be. But there was a lot of hidden meaning or things kind of sprinkled in there that make me think this would be a really good story for required reading in schools, personally. But I know my boyfriend, I think, actually read this for school, but he wasn't forced to read it. So there's that. I personally think this should be required reading, but that's just me. It was really easy to follow. It was well written. There was a lot of meaning between these pages. It's less than 300 pages, but there's a lot of meaning. And just, yes. I really enjoyed the story. Like I said, I thought it was fantastically written. It was amazing. I loved being able to pick up on some of the more hidden messages in here. And it was great. And also I love the fact that you're essentially like a jury member. You get to read Steve's journal entries, but he doesn't really tell you too much about the crime that took place that he was involved in. So you don't really get a biased perspective of the court case. You don't get a biased perspective of what happened the day of the homicide. And so you kind of are a jury member reading this from an unbiased perspective, trying to figure out whether you think Steve is innocent or not. And I really, really enjoyed that. And the author intended for that. There's like an interview at the end of this book where he says that the ending is supposed to be kind of ambiguous and you're kind of supposed to come to your own conclusions. And I really, really love books that are kind of like that. I love books that have ambiguous endings. I think they are great. I know some people just hate them. I personally really like them. So yeah, I enjoyed this book. 4 out of 5 stars. So the next book I read is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This is a horror standalone YA, as far as I know. The way it's written on Goodreads makes it sound like it could possibly turn into a series, but we're not sure, so I don't know. For now, it's a standalone, though. So this takes place a year and a half after a tox has hit an island where an all-girl school is, and we follow 3 main characters, Hetty, Byatt, and Reese, as they kind of deal with this tox in quarantine. They've been in quarantine for about a year and a half, and if they break this quarantine, the CDC and the Navy will stop helping them. Essentially, about once a week, the CDC and Navy drop off food and supplies for the girls so that they can survive another week on the island while they try to figure out a cure or a way to help them. And essentially, the tox that is taken over is causing the girls to mutate, as well as the animals and the island itself to mutate. The girls all kind of have different aspects that have changed about themselves. None of the mutations are alike. And personally, I really enjoyed this book. I loved the plot. I loved the way Power wrote the mutations, and she's really good at body horror and just giving off a creepy vibe in general. She's very good at setting the atmosphere appropriately. So I really enjoyed my journey through this story, but at the same time, I also was not attached to the characters. It's not a character-driven story for me, so as a result, I wasn't super invested in them, and as a result, the emotions I feel like I was supposed to feel during certain scenes never hit, and that kind of ruins a story for you in some way, shape, or form. I have heard that people had a problem with the ending of this book. I personally did not have an issue with that at all. I enjoyed it. So that's just my perspective. That's just my thoughts on it. I genuinely enjoyed the way it ended. So yeah, I ended up giving this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it enough to think that it was okay. It wasn't mind-blowing or anything. I just really loved the writing. So I'm hopefully going to be able to read more Rory Power in the future, because I definitely did like her writing style. I'm very good at writing creepiness. So the next book is the final book in this wrap-up, and that is You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogel. This is another book that I borrowed from my library. It's narrated by Taylor Meskimen. Let me just say, so after reading all these like darker, heavier, creepier stories, I just wanted something that was a little bit more lighthearted. And I went through my library's audiobooks for like romance and contemporary, and this one popped up. And I had just watched a video by Mika August where she talked about this book being like one of her favorites, and she didn't entirely describe what the plot was. So when I read what the plot was, I was like, oh goodness, yes. So she sold me on it, and then the synopsis itself sold me on it, and I was like, yes, I need to read this book right now. So if you don't know anything about this, this is an adult romance contemporary novel, and essentially it's second chance love, hate to lovers type of plot line, and it is unique in the way that it's told, because essentially our main characters are a couple. They're engaged, like they're going to be married, and they realize that they are kind of fed up with each other. They don't love each other the way they thought they did, and as a result, a kind of prank war starts between them, and the end goal is to get the engagement canceled. And make it so the person that wins doesn't have to pay for everything that got canceled and moved and things like that. So the story is essentially a prank war between a couple that is engaged and no longer loves each other. And I understand why Mika loves this book, because I ended up loving it. This is one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It is so funny. And it just, like, it gets your heart racing. You get all flustered and red in the face. I got super red in the face during a couple of scenes. Like, it was just so enjoyable. It was entertaining. It was lighthearted. It was funny. And it was fast-paced. And it was just super entertaining. And I loved it so much. I could not recommend this book more than, like, I could not. It's so good, and I'm so grateful that Mika mentioned it, because I feel like if she hadn't, I would have just scrolled right past it. But wow. I will also link that video down below so you guys can check it out too. But this book was fantastic. I loved it. So we're ending this video on a high note. But yeah. So far, I'm enjoying my reading this year. I've really had, like, a lot of fun. I've obviously found some duds, but the good outweighs the bad, in my opinion, so far. So I'm really happy about that. Hopefully next time I do this, I'll have less books to talk about. Unless you guys like me having this many books to talk about, just let me know down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Tell me some of the books you've read recently, or comment on some of the books that I've mentioned here. And thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have an awesome day, and bye.